story about something getting lost in the mail. There are those remarkable miracles achieved by people doing their faithful duty at the U.S. Postal Service in the real attempt to live up to that motto. In fact, decades ago, when I was an unknown parking attendant in Boston, I actually received a piece of mail, an envelope, delivered to my home from Ireland, addressed simply Lawrence O'Donnell, USA. The Postal Service didn't have much to go on when they saw that address, but they didn't give up. It took a couple of months, and everyone involved in finding my home address in Dorchester and delivering that piece of mail to me worked as hard as they possibly could to deliver that mail to fulfill their sacred duty. And they got it right. Miraculously, they got it right. And now Donald Trump and his Postmaster General, David Steiner, are eager to block the delivery of my election ballot by mail if they don't like the envelope that the state uses for that. The three justices appointed by Democratic presidents, of course, dissented. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, appointed by President Obama, wrote, quote, "The order thus requires a fundamental overhaul of the state's existing mail-in ballot systems, changing from a state-administered process to one in which the federal government controls who gets a ballot and whose vote counts." John Roberts will get his mail-in ballot. Clarence Thomas will get his mail-in ballot. Donald Trump will get his mail-in ballot, and he'll use it. Their ballots will be delivered. But what about mine? What about yours? The fight against Donald Trump's voter suppression executive order will continue in court now that the rule the Postal Service issued on Friday is final. The Supreme Court will not be able to say it is still too soon to fight that rule in court. And so it will be fought in court. And tonight, the governor of the state with the largest number of mail-in ballots in this country said, quote, "Wow, the Supreme Court just let the Trump administration move ahead for now with its plan to disenfranchise voters across the country. California will be suing again to block these Orwellian rules from being implemented." So the very same set of facts might be back in front of the Supreme Court soon. And it will be another case for the realists on the Supreme Court, Ketanji Brown Jackson, Sonia Sotomayor, and Elena Kagan, versus the Natalie Harps of the Supreme Court, the believers that Donald Trump can do no wrong even after they have seen the wrong, even after they have heard him do the wrong in that phone call to the Georgia Secretary of State. Nothing said by anyone in the Iranian regime during Donald Trump's war with Iran has angered Donald Trump and his White House staff as much as something Senator John Ossoff said about Donald and Natalie.
While the sailors on the Lincoln fight his war, while he fruitlessly drains our munitions and oil reserves, the president sleeps through his meetings. He golfs and trades stocks. See, he doesn't want to do the job. He wants to build his ballroom and travel with Natalie on their apparently defenseless flying palace gifted by the Emir of Qatar.
The White House attack dogs came after John Ossoff viciously for that reference to Natalie. And that White House reaction created even more attention to what Maureen Dowd's Sunday column in the New York Times calls Natalie's magnificent obsession. Quote, "It turns out, with three little words, Ossoff pulled a string and unraveled something really dark and deranged at the innermost circle of Trump's White House. The president's proclivity for surrounding himself with sycophants and attractive young blondes is well known, but this relationship is pathological and a source of great irritation among other courtiers. It is Trump distilled to his essence, cult leader and his most rabid follower, narcissist, and his most flattering mirror, the daughter of a devoutly Christian real estate broker who died by suicide during the pandemic. Harp idolizes Trump with a rare fervor. As one of his social media facilitators, she is with him most of the day and often evenings, and she never takes a day off. The Times' Maggie Haberman calls Harp the Binky of the man-child president. It was reporting by Maggie Haberman that revealed Natalie Harp is the perverse racist supplier of one of Donald Trump's social media posts depicting President Obama and Michelle Obama as animals. It is one of the few Trump social media posts that was judged too evil and sick and racist and deeply perverse for even Donald Trump to post, and so it was taken down. That racist post, made possible by racist Natalie Harp, takes its place in the rare collection of Trump social media poison that even Donald Trump could not defend. Natalie Harp's social media post about the Obamas was so dark and else in the White House, including his wife, properly be now described as a surprise appearance at the White House. She is the first First Lady in history for whom presence at the White House is a surprise. She had not been seen publicly by anyone, anywhere, in 31 days. When she presented herself on Thursday at the height of the Natalie Harp scandal and spoke these inane words.
Good afternoon. Here I am.
Chris Whipple literally wrote the book, actually the books about White House chiefs of staff, and is an authority on White House organization and the operations of White House personnel. This weekend, he told Alex Witt this about Natalie Harp.
It's an extraordinary relationship, unique I think, in this White House. Natalie Harp is clearly a troubled young woman with a need to idolize Donald Trump. But the real danger here is Trump's fixation on her. In a normal White House, presidents have a so-called staff secretary who tees up reliable information on every side of an issue so that a president can make decisions. But in this case, proximity is power. And so Trump is getting his information from someone who wants to please, only tells him what he wants to hear. And so he's getting his information from, in effect, from a kind of fact-free fangirl. And that's nobody's idea of a staff secretary in a healthy White House.
It is an unhealthy White House. It is a dark and deranged White House. And the dark and deranged section of the United States Supreme Court, which might as well be led by Chief Justice Natalie Harp, actually pretends to believe that Donald Trump spends his day working on, of all things, election integrity. Joining us now is Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island. He's a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator, what was your reaction to the White House decision today?
More weirdness out of this Supreme Court. In one sense, it's a nothing of a decision because there were two lower court proceedings. One was brought by the Democrat attorneys general. That covered the states of those attorneys general. That was the one where the order was stayed. But there's another one that was brought by advocacy groups that covers all 50 states. And that order still stands. So it really doesn't have much effect. And in the ordinary course, and in front of an ordinary court, you'd think, okay, no big deal. But the fuss in this case that caught all of the Republican justices' attention was the difference between a proposed order and a final order, which is a fairly minor technicality. Against that are 50 states with state-run elections and state election officials who have to prepare for an election in November and who are entitled to know what the rules are going to be about mail-in ballots sooner rather than later. And when you put those two things in balance, you'd think it would easily come down on just waving off that decision, particularly when the final rule is, in fact, now out. And then you get into the background of all of this, which is postmasters general have never had a role in elections. The states have a role in elections. So it's a huge shift from state to federal power, and it gives an election authority to an individual who's never had it before. And then, of course, it's a prior restraint on access to the mail for certain voters. And it's really always been the case. I used to prosecute mail fraud cases. The thing goes through the mail first. Then you prosecute the mail fraud. You don't try to stop people from using the mail, bar them categorically. Even if they're criminals, you pursue them after the mail fraud. And here they're going after ordinary voters, which raises the whole context of President Trump's election interference scheming. And in the context of a court that will come up with crazy decisions like presidential immunity when it's not in the Constitution, and do false fact-finding about dark money to keep its Citizens United decision rolling, it's really hard not to feel a little reverberation of anxiety that this is a court that, once again, is up to no good for a political motive.
So there's a line in there about time will tell. Basically, time will tell if Donald Trump wants to commit a crime here. They say that, of course, that this ruling doesn't mean that any measure taken by the government to implement the order will necessarily be lawful. On that score, time will tell. Time will tell if Donald Trump wants to do something illegal with the elections. And the idea that they had the rule from the Postal Service on Friday, and they still published this opinion on Monday, pretending they don't know what's in it, pretending time will tell what's in the ruling that was issued Friday.
Yeah, I mean, it's really quite bizarre and even, pretty sloppy. You'd think that they would say that they knew this, but they're going ahead knowing that the second round of litigation on this will be there shortly. But why butt in the first place right now, unless what you want to signal is that a plainly illegal executive order by Trump is something that we will stroke our chins and consider seriously as if this was something legitimate going on. And of course, adding uncertainty to the elections for 50 different states' election officials really helps serve the election disruption purposes of this administration.
Senator, please stay with us. We're going to fit in a commercial break here. And when we come back, I want to ask you about Donald Trump's new war, this one against Canada. We'll be right back with Senator Whitehouse.
But what I really love, 6 times the points. Just eat your points, sweetie. I love you more than all the stars in the sky. And slightly more than all the points I'm earning. Just eat your points, sweetie. I love you more than all the stars in the sky. And slightly more than all the points I'm earning.
City Strata Elite.
First term in the White House, Donald Trump presided over a standard update of the North American Free Trade Agreement, the trade agreement he condemned in his first campaign for president. Each country fully complied with that agreement every day of that agreement until Donald Trump decided to violate the agreement that he himself had agreed to during his first term. And now Donald Trump is trying to impose unconstitutional and illegal and astronomically high tariffs that are paid for by Americans on products imported to this country from Canada. The Wall Street Journal called Donald Trump's new war against Canada his dumbest trade war. On Saturday, Republican Senator running for re-election, Susan Collins, said this.
I still think imposing new tariffs on Canada is a mistake. We produce a lot of mail, our blueberries, our potatoes, our lobster, our lumber, that is processed across the board. If it comes back with a huge tariff on it, perhaps as much as 50%, that increases the cost of heating, building homes, and purchasing our best-known products. So I have voted repeatedly against the Canadian tariffs.
Ontario's Premier Doug Ford said this.
I'm not going to take any advice off a guy that's the king of bankruptcies. And he's actually tariffing his own people, taxing his own people. And I'm going to make sure I communicate through the U.S. media. I'm going to be reaching out to every single governor, every single senator, and every single congressperson. And when it comes to the midterms, I have a message to the Americans. Don't vote in a person that's going to kill your jobs. He ran on creating more jobs. Last time I checked, jobs went down in the U.S. and Ontario created more jobs. He ran on reducing the cost of living. Last time I checked, food's more expensive down there. Homes are more expensive. And the reason homes are more expensive because he has a tariff on our lumber, which 33% of all homes that are built in the U.S. use Canadian lumber.
Here's what Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney said about what the Wall Street Journal calls Donald Trump's dumbest trade war.
You're at war when you get attacked. You got attacked.
With us, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, members of the Finance Committee with jurisdiction over tariffs. Senator Donald Trump, once again, thinks he can get away with imposing these tariffs individually. Will these tariffs also be fought in court?
I expect that they will, but the real damage comes between now and November, likely before a court decision, at least a final one, gets reached. And that's what's peculiar here. We're coming into an election. We're about, a little over 70 days out. The number one concern of the American people is the cost of stuff. That and the feeling that we have a chaotic bumbler of a president. And he goes off on this chaotic bumble of Canadian tariffs that will raise costs even more for American voters. You look at swing states, contested states like Michigan, like New Hampshire, like Maine, that are border states with Canada. They don't just have, trade and tourism across the border. They've got friendships, family relationships across the border. And the idea that you want to inflame all of that 70 days out with tariffs so chaotic that the Wall Street Journal, that mouthpiece of corporate big business and the fossil fuel industry, calls him dumb, and that this is a blunderbuss approach. I don't think they were insensitive to the word blunder in the middle of blunderbuss. So he's making a huge mess. And, I can't help but think that there's something in the back of his strange mind that knows he's failing as president and that wishes to tear down the whole Republican Party with him so that he does not fail alone. There's almost no other logical explanation for why a president with control over all the chambers of Congress and the White House would, on the issue most important to the American people, do something so stupid and so counterproductive and so chaotic today that both hit the cost button of the American voter and the problem of him being a chaotic bumbler. So I don't know that you need to get to a court to solve the problem here. The problem is in the pocketbooks of American voters who I think have figured out that, guess what? Tariffs raise my costs.
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad Doug Ford specified that American voters, Americans are the ones who pay these tariffs. That's the lie Donald Trump's been trying to get away with for years now. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And coming up, Donald Trump is now comparing his war in Iran to D-Day, the most successful and ultimately triumphant American invasion force in history, back when Canada was our ally in war. That's next. Here to the elections is to only be engaged in what he's claiming is an economic war with Iran. How would that work?
Well, it's not going to work on a number of levels. I think they're using the D-Day branding as sort of to sound muscular. But of course, as you know, in military language, D-Day vernacular means that's the day you start an operation. Nothing started today. It was really just a threat to maybe put in international sanctions going forward. But history does not bode well for the idea of trying to bring a war to an end just through sanctions. There's only one example back in the 90s with Bosnia where sanctions, UN sanctions, by the way, not just U.S. sanctions, actually helped get Milosevic back to the table, but it also took additional bombing, too. So there's not a good track record here, and these weren't sanctions that were announced. The other thing about it is it only works if you have partners. You talked about D-Day and our allies in your opening, and you're right. We had a dozen allies hitting those beaches with us. You can't do something like what Mr. Bessent wants to do without allies and partners engaged in that. And right now, we're a coalition of one. The other thing that is concerning is that the devil's got to be in the details. The only way sanctions bite is if they're fully implemented. You can just bet yourself in your next paycheck that Iran is going to find a way to get around it. And I was very intrigued by what Mr. Bessent said about China today. He really soft-pedaled on China. If China's not on board with this regime, then it's really not going to work. They get 90% of their oil from Iran, and they have workarounds in the past. So, I want the regime to come to the table. I'm glad that they're looking for ways to do this short of bombing. I don't want to begrudge them their creativity here, but I'm skeptical because sanctions just typically don't work in the middle of a war. And this regime has shown no propensity to be driven by economic considerations of their own people.
Admiral John Kirby, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Yes, sir.
And coming up, an issue ignored in the elections 2 years ago is now a top campaign issue, and it is hurting Republicans, especially in the state of Ohio, where our next guest is running for governor. Dr. Amy Acton joins us next. We are in one of those moments in American politics where an issue that wasn't even mentioned in the elections of 2 years ago is now a top campaign issue, especially in Ohio, where our next guest, Dr. Amy Acton, is running against the Trump-endorsed Vivek Ramaswamy for governor.
We have an AI data center boom in the state of Ohio, which is great. I'm all for it.
Listen, big tech billionaires are coming into Ohio, building data centers, and expecting all of us to pick up the tab. But that ends on my watch. As governor, I'll make sure that data centers play by our rules and not the other way around. And that's why I rolled out my plan for a conditional moratorium on data centers in Ohio. I will never, ever lower our standards for clean air and water just to make life a little easier for some billionaire corporation. If companies don't meet these standards, then they don't get to do business in Ohio. Our state will always, always be open for business, but we will never be for sale.
Data centers were not mentioned in the presidential campaign debate 2 years ago, and now Republicans are worried about losing the Senate because of that issue. Axios reports the National Republican Senatorial Campaign Committee says Democrats have made data centers a centerpiece of their campaign to defeat Ohio Senator John Husted, and it's working.
John Husted led the charge to bring these data centers to our state. He delivered giant corporations billions of dollars in sweetheart tax deals. Now Ohioans pay thousands more dollars on their utility bills.
Sherrod Brown has been polling ahead of Ohio's Republican Senator John Husted in the Senate campaign in Ohio. James David Vance went to his home state of Ohio to campaign for the Republican candidates for governor and for Senate, and here's what he did when he couldn't remember one of their names.
I ask you, each and every one of you, to stand on your own conscience, to vote for patriots, to vote for people who are going to fight for you, to vote for John Husted for the United States Senate and for Vivek for the governor of Ohio.
The vice president is half Donald Trump's age, but he is Donald Trump's equal in his command of names and facts. Joining us now is the Democratic nominee for governor in Ohio. Dr. Amy Acton, she previously served as the director of the Ohio Department of Health. Dr. Acton, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Was it a surprise to you that Vice President Vance could not remember your opponent's name?
Well, I think a lot of people at home, Lawrence, will remember his name, Mr. Vivek Ramaswamy, one of the most famous scam artists, did run for president once, and made his money in pump and dump schemes, touting an Alzheimer's cure that he said would help people. He knew the drug didn't work. His mom did the phase 3 trials in Bermuda, and he cut out of that deal right before the results were made public, leaving a lot of people in their retirements in the lurch. So I remember that name. I think Ohioans are going to remember that name this fall.
There's a report that his campaign finance records show that he has spent about $700,000 leasing private jets. Now, I mean, Ohio's not a small state, but I mean, you know, Cleveland to Cincinnati is what, 250 miles, something like that? How do you spend $700,000 on private jets in Ohio?
Well, you know, I am up against a self-funding billionaire who has spent that much on airplanes. I've been driving around Ohio for 2.5 years now in an old Jeep. And by the way, Jeeps are made in Ohio, so it's a source of pride for us. But he is not just out of touch. He's out for himself, and quite frankly, he's a danger to Ohio and the rest of this country. He has spent now over $40 million in ads against me since March. It hasn't moved the needle one bit. Ohioans are struggling right now with the cost of everyday living. You talked about the data centers earlier, Lawrence. You know, our electric bills are going up. Communities are seeing these companies and billionaire friends of my opponent come in the dark of night. It's endangering our air and our water. You know, and as I said, we're not, you know, saying we're not open for business. We are, but we're not for sale. And the people of my state aren't for sale. I have no doubt that in November, the people of Ohio are going to tell Mr. Ramaswamy in no uncertain terms that they cannot buy this state and they can't buy us. I'm really hoping a lot of people will pay attention to this race. It's really quite a story. I think the story of Ohio is going to be the story of this nation. There's a lot more at actonforgovernor.com, but I'd love everyone to learn more alongside of me and Ohioans.
And your opponent is a champion of data centers. That was his voice that we heard on your phone at the beginning of the video.
It is. He said it's a boom, and it's easy for a billionaire to say it's a boom because he has, you know, millions and millions of dollars invested. And, you know, you have to wonder why someone like him is even running for governor in the first place in Ohio. He moved his business to Texas right before running for governor of Ohio. We keep saying he has no business in Ohio. And that's the thing. Someone who's doing that, do we really believe he cares about us, or he's out here to help us or our communities? You know, I'm a doctor. I'm not a politician, but I am a lifelong public servant. And I'm fighting to make sure that everyone gets a fair shot in Ohio and has a chance for a good life. It's an honor to be in this race.
Dr. Amy Acton, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, Lawrence.
Thank you. We'll be right back.
We all need fiber.